Today we're talking about the truth about coffee. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? In the natural health world, everybody wants a black and white answer. They want to know, is this food healthy? Yes, 100% of the time. No, 100% of the time. But the truth is that the answer is actually very nuanced. So if there's any health influencers out there that will say something like coffee is not healthy 100% of the time, they are wrong. If they say it's healthy 100% of the time, they are wrong. The truth is, the research shows around 65% of people can actually have great health benefits by consuming coffee. It actually helps to improve their blood sugar, reduces their risk of developing chronic inflammatory autoimmune types of health issues, and overall can increase their longevity and increases their quality of life while they are living. Those are all great benefits. But there's about 35% of the population, if they drink coffee in the way that most people consume coffee, will actually have very delirious health effects, right? It actually increases their risk of all-cause morbidity and mortality and reduces their overall quality of life. And so in today's video, I'm gonna go through why that is, right? I'm gonna go through the health benefits of coffee, how coffee actually works. I'm also gonna go through how people who benefit from coffee can actually reduce those benefits depending on how they choose their coffee and how they drink it. And I'm gonna go through how they can actually maximize their benefits. And I'm also gonna take that 35% of the population that may not benefit from coffee and actually may cause more problems. I'm gonna show you how they can actually consume some coffee and actually get some level of health benefit and reduce any sort of negative effects. So this is gonna be a deep dive on coffee. First, let's start with what coffee actually does in our brain. Of course, we're talking about caffeine, caffeinated coffee. Coffee is rich in polyphenols. It has chlorogenic acid, caffeic acid. These polyphenols actually improve the gut microbiome. They've been shown to help support blood sugar stability and help improve insulin sensitivity. Those are all very important things for improving our overall health. Caffeine, it's a nervous system stimulant, and what it actually does is it blocks something called adenosine. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that has an inhibitory effect in the nervous system. So it actually causes the nervous system to have less activity and makes us feel a little bit more like when adenosine is elevated, it makes us feel a little bit more tired and lethargic. This is actually beneficial for us being able to sleep and get deep sleep and deep recovery. That's why the nervous system produces adenosine. However, when you're, throughout the day, when you're trying to do activities that demand high-level mental performance, having a lot of adenosine activity in your nervous system is not beneficial. It's going to make you feel tireder, perhaps even a little bit more depressed, and obviously not be able to think sharply and quickly the way that you want. And that's where something like caffeine can come in, block the adenosine, and that actually elevates dopamine. See, adenosine blocks dopamine and norepinephrine, which are excitatory neurotransmitters. It blocks their activity. So when we block adenosine, now we end up with more dopamine, more norepinephrine, which helps us think sharper and clearer, have better memory recall, and actually helps support healthy mood. We feel we have a more positive mood. We think, we're just sharper. We feel better from that perspective if we are also able to break down the caffeine effectively, right? We need to be able to break down caffeine. We also need to be able to break down dopamine and norepinephrine in our nervous system in order to get the desired effects, right, without any negative consequences. And so this is really the mechanism that's taking place when we consume something like coffee or really any sort of caffeinated beverage. Now, let's talk about that population. Why does 65% have the ability to respond well to coffee and then 35% tend to not respond well? There's a couple reasons, and they have to do with the quality of the coffee, what else is in the coffee. Does it have mycotoxins? Does it have pesticides and herbicides? How well do we detoxify pesticides and herbicides? How well do we detoxify mycotoxins that may be in the coffee? Also, we have to look at how well do we break down and clear caffeine from our bloodstream. When it comes to caffeine and a lot of these toxins, it depends on this key enzyme called CYP1A2 or cytochrome P450 1A2 enzyme. And there's three different alleles, three different subtypes of this enzyme. The AA allele, the adenosine allele, is the fast metabolizer. This is the individual that can drink coffee at night and still sleep, right? They are a very fast metabolizer of caffeine. They drink coffee in the morning and it's like 2 hours later, they feel like they need more, right? Because they metabolize it and break it down so quickly. There is the AC allele. They are medium metabolizers, okay? And so the coffee is gonna last a certain amount, usually a 6-hour half-life or something like that. And then the CC allele is the slow metabolizer of caffeine. These are the individuals, the CCs, right? It's about a third of the population that tend to struggle if they consume a good a good dose of coffee. The average cup of coffee is somewhere between 80 to 100 milligrams of caffeine. Obviously, you can get, double shots and espressos that have a lot more caffeine in them. And of course, you can also moderate that dose or dilute the coffee and consume a lower dose. A typical dose of caffeine for a CC, CYP-A12 enzyme metabolizer, I know it's a lot of words right there, but for that individual, that can overexcite their nervous system. And they may feel overly jittery, not feel good, right? And it elevates their blood sugar. If they were looking at a continuous blood glucose monitor, or if they were to test their blood glucose, they might see a big rise in blood sugar when they consume that as well. So they get this kind of big stress hormone release. Now, there are a couple other things that also increase caffeine metabolism or decrease caffeine metabolism. So what's going to actually increase caffeine metabolism? Vitamin C, that can actually help remove caffeine from your system faster. And also cruciferous vegetables, the sulforaphane and the isothiocyanates that are in cruciferous vegetables can actually move caffeine out of your system faster. So if you are, let's say, a slow metabolizer, perhaps taking vitamin C can be beneficial. Consuming cruciferous vegetables, that can be beneficial to help increase your metabolism of the caffeine. What decreases caffeine clearance? One thing that actually decreases caffeine clearance, which keeps caffeine elevated in your system, especially so, is oral contraceptives, birth control pills, oral contraceptives, particularly during the luteal phase, which is right after ovulation, basically day 14 to 28. So from ovulation to the time that a woman menstruates, that's that luteal phase. Oral contraceptive use will actually double the caffeine half-life in your system. And so some women that are taking oral contraceptives may notice certain times in the month after ovulation that the caffeine just overwires them, right? Or maybe they just need less coffee to get the desired benefits. But either way, it's good to know. There are also a lot of natural agents, things that I've recommended, things that I put in a lot of the products that I use and that I take personally that can also decrease caffeine metabolism. Now, this is a lot more subtler of a decrease, okay? So it's not as noticeable as something like oral contraceptives. That's gonna be things like quercetin, turmeric, cumin, dandelion, what else? St. John's wort, chamomile, peppermint. So a lot of these very beneficial herbs can actually decrease the time it takes to metabolize the caffeine. So for most people, they're not going to notice a difference there taking those herbs. But for somebody that's already a very slow metabolizer, it may move the needle for that individual. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind and keep track of. I think that's important. There's also a couple of other key enzymes. One is the ADORA A2 gene, right? And this has to do with the adenosine receptor. And so there are certain types of alleles. There's a T type and there's a C type. The C one is the most dominant. For this individual, when they consume coffee in the evening, it can affect their sleep. For the T allele, which is a minor form, that individual, it can cause more anxiety. So that's the ADORA A2 gene. And that has to do with the adenosine receptor. And then finally, there is the ADA gene, which has to do with the enzyme that metabolizes adenosine. And so the A allele, which is a minor allele, causes a 35% reduction, right, when you have that in adenosine, which can cause higher levels of adenosine. This might be an individual that feels like they need a lot of caffeine stimulus to really make it through the day. Okay, that individual may need a lot more caffeine, and if they're combined with maybe a fast caffeine metabolizer, so the CYP 1A2 enzyme, AA, that individual may, for example, they may feel like they need a lot of caffeine exposure throughout the day, and because they're metabolizing it well, they may feel good overall, right, doing that. And so another important thing to understand about coffee in general is it's actually the #1 source of beneficial polyphenols in the typical American's diet and lifestyle. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, because coffee, when we compare it to things like high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, when we compare it to things like cranberries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, so all of our beneficial fruits, a lot of different vegetables, it's not really that great of a source of polyphenols compared to some of these other things. But for most Americans, they're consuming a diet rich in ultra-processed foods, and the coffee is providing the beneficial polyphenols. But with that said, coffee does have some really great polyphenols, chlorogenic acid and caffeic acid, which have been researched to help improve brain function, support blood sugar stability, improve insulin resistance. They actually help support the microbiome and create a stronger, more integrous gut lining. And that's all super beneficial. And we break down all the benefits of coffee. We know that it really improves brain health. People think sharper and clearer, right? We know that short term, and most people have experienced that. In fact, I always say coffee, or caffeine in general, should be a great performance enhancer. You should feel great after you consume coffee for the next 4 to 6 hours. You should feel really, really good. If you don't, if you feel jittery, if you feel if you've got a lot of anxiety, if you have more cravings or hunger, it's a sign that you either don't metabolize caffeine or coffee well, or there's bad things in the coffee, or you didn't get the right dosage. Maybe you took too much coffee or too much caffeine. So that's what you have to look at if you're not responding well to the coffee. But we know that coffee not only makes us feel better in the short term, but also long-term coffee drinkers have a lower risk of neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's disease. So if you have that in your family history, coffee consumption in the right dosage with the right kind of coffee, which I'm going to go through, that can be extremely beneficial for your overall brain health. Okay. Also, we know that it improves blood sugar levels. Individuals that drink coffee have a lower risk of developing diabetes and blood sugar problems. Number 3 is it increases fat burning. So it actually activates something called AMP kinase, which turns on fat burning, activates what we call lipolysis. And so we start to break down fat for fuel, and it preserves our tissue glycogen. So the sugar that we store in our muscles and our liver, when we consume coffee, those polyphenols, the compounds in there, and the caffeine help to preserve a lot of that glycogen for, when we exercise or something like that. And a lot of times people have elevated blood sugar because their liver or their muscles are spurting out all this extra glycogen. So it keeps that under control and improves fat burning. Also, for a lot of individuals, I know I get this benefit, it helps improve bowel movements. I always say, you really want to get at least 1 to 2 good quality bowel movements first thing, as early as you can in the morning, right? Ideally, like within the first 3 hours of waking, you want to get at least 1 to 2 bowel movements. Our large intestine, our colon, is most active between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. That's when you're going to get the best bowel movement activity. So taking some coffee, doing at the right time that I'm going to go through as we go on in this video, but taking some coffee can actually benefit that. It activates peristalsis, this muscle contraction in your gut, to help sweep toxins, to help sweep feces out of your system and eliminate them. And so it can be really, really profound for that, which helps reduce your overall toxic load and makes you feel better, right? I think all of us have felt better when we move our bowels, get a really good bowel movement in. Early in the day, you feel lighter, you feel cleaner. There's less endotoxins that are going to drive up stress hormones, that are going to create more inflammation, drive up inflammatory activity in your body, so you feel better, okay? And then finally, it actually activates autophagy. So consuming some coffee, particularly while you're fasting, like in an intermittent fast, can really benefit the cellular cleanup that needs to take place. We know that autophagy, or basically means self-eating, is when the body breaks down damaged proteins within the cell. We need to be doing this on a regular basis. Intermittent fasting, where we're taking time without food and our insulin comes down, is the number one stimulus for autophagy. Exercise is number two, but number three actually can be things like coffee or different types of foods and herbs that stimulate autophagy, coffee being one of the best for that. And so it helps stimulate the breakdown of damaged proteins within our cells, and then our cells recycle the amino acids and create new healthy mitochondria, new healthy proteins within the cell so the cell can function better. And this is one of the reasons why coffee consumption is actually associated in research with improved longevity, right? And improved overall health span, people feeling better and functioning better as they age and living longer because of its impact on autophagy, blood sugar, right? And fat burning. And that's also why it improves the brain, because the number one thing that causes neurodegenerative conditions is abnormal protein buildup in the neurons. And so if we're eliminating those by stimulating autophagy, or getting rid of the damaged proteins in the brain and the neurons, then we're gonna recycle them and create new healthy proteins. Those neurons are gonna function better. We're gonna be able to think sharper and clearer in the short term, and then have less risk of neurodegenerative conditions in the long term. So coffee can have, these amazing benefits. Now, how do we maximize the benefits of coffee? Well, number one, I would recommend, and this is especially so if you're somebody that has not felt good consuming coffee in the past, you certainly want to start slow, right? You want to find the right dosage of caffeine that works for you. For some individuals, if they consume 80 to 100 milligrams, which is the typical cup of coffee, that way overexcites their nervous system. But if they do half of that, 40 to 50 milligrams, they actually feel really good, right? That's the right dosage for them. So trying to tighter and find the right dosage that works well for you can be really beneficial. I find that the majority of people, this is probably gonna be about 80 to 90%, if we were to look at like a bell curve, there are gonna be outliers on both sides, but most people are gonna fall in this middle form of the bell curve, do well with about 50 to 150 milligrams once or twice a day, okay? So maybe one in the morning and then one later, like after lunch, 1, 2 o'clock. I don't recommend consuming coffee within at least, at the closest to bedtime, it would be 6 hours. Really, ideally 6 to 8 hours before bed, you don't want to consume caffeine. Now, there are some individuals that they can drink coffee. I talked about that earlier. They can drink coffee, they can drink a big shot of espresso at 9 o'clock and then fall asleep at 10 o'clock. I don't understand it, but just how quickly they clear caffeine and how much adenosine is left in their nervous system based on different genes, right? We talked about the ADA gene, talked about the CYP-A12 gene, right? So these are gonna impact that. But for most people, stopping coffee consumption roughly around 2, maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's gonna be most beneficial. If you notice that consuming coffee at 3 o'clock doesn't allow you to fall asleep well, then cut it back, right? 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and kind of find where the cutoff time needs to be for you. So that's what you want to do, personalize it. Number two, okay, this is going to upset some people, but you want to consume your first cup 90 to 120 minutes after waking. And you guys are like, what? I thought coffee was good. I drink it every morning when I get up. It's actually, you're not getting the best benefits consuming it first thing in the morning. Here's the reason. When you first wake up, you have wakefulness hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, that are elevated in your bloodstream, or they should be elevated in your bloodstream. That's what allows you to wake up in the morning, get out of bed, right, and get going with your day. Some individuals, they really struggle because they don't have what we call the cortisol awakening response, and so it's really hard for them to get out of bed. Okay, and oftentimes they depend on coffee to get going in the day. We don't want that. We want coffee to be a support, but not a dependency. That's really the key. Okay, and so by waiting at least 90 minutes, we allow our natural cortisol levels to rise, and then they start to come down a little bit. And now we get kind of the smooth rise with consuming some caffeine that can give us sustained performance benefits as the morning goes on. This is what I do. So what I always do is I drink 2 to 3 cups, because I like I like some sort of warm beverage in the morning. Just really helps me we keep our house cool at night oftentimes because it helps us sleep better. I want something warm, and the warm beverage actually helps stimulate peristalsis and stimulate bowel movements. So I will drink 2 to sometimes 3 or 4 cups of herbal tea before I even drink any sort of coffee. So I'm having herbal tea first. That's what I go to first. And then after roughly 90 to 120 minutes, somewhere in that range usually, that's when I have my first cup of coffee. And so for me, I'm usually waking up 6:30 in the morning. So usually by 8, somewhere between 8 and 9, that's when I'm usually having my first cup of coffee. And so that's really the most beneficial way of timing it out so you get the best benefits. And now that coffee typically is going to have, depending on how quickly you metabolize caffeine, usually a 4 to 8 hour window, right, where it's going to be, you're going to get the benefits. And so now it kind of takes you in right up to lunch. Number 3, add salt and minerals, right? And so when we're consuming coffee, sometimes we're already salt and electrolyte deficient. In fact, one of the reasons why somebody who's a slow caffeine metabolizer may have an exaggerated negative response to caffeine, in fact, it's probably the most common reason, is that they are magnesium deficient and oftentimes overall electrolyte deficient. So they're deficient in sodium, in particular, sometimes potassium, and then also magnesium. So taking electrolytes, in fact, some companies actually give you you can actually buy an electrolyte dropper to put in the coffee, right? Or you can also take a magnesium capsule, or you can put salt in your coffee. There's a lot of different ways of doing this, or just take salt, put it on your finger, and take it in your mouth, and then maybe some magnesium supplement, and then drink your coffee. And that can actually help you improve your response. So it's smoother, cleaner, less jittery, and better overall brain function. So that's really key here. Number 4 is make sure you get a really clean coffee. You want to make sure it's organic, because coffee is one of the most pesticide, herbicide sprayed plants out there. So if you're going and you're getting coffee from your typical coffee store, right? I'm not against that 100%, but if you just go to Starbucks or wherever it is and just get a coffee every single day, you are getting tons of pesticides and herbicides in your cup. So you want to make sure with coffee, for absolute sure, as much as possible, you're getting that organic to reduce the amount of toxins going in your system. Some people react really negatively when they consume pesticides and herbicides, and that may be contributing to the negative effects that you're experiencing when you consume coffee. Also, it puts more stress on this CYP1A2 enzyme, which can slow down its ability to break down the caffeine as well. So if you're not feeling good with your coffee, make sure you try to get organic. And I also recommend mycotoxin-free. What are mycotoxins? They're mold toxins. So coffee is very commonly contaminated with mold, okay, and mycotoxins in the actual coffee bean. When we consume them, we may have a really negative response. And so get coffee from a company. I like this company called Life Boost Coffee because they are third-party certified to be mycotoxin free. So they have a separate lab that tests their coffee, makes sure that it's mycotoxin free, it's all organic, and then the last thing is shade grown. And the reason why shade grown is beneficial is that most coffee that's grown in the sun develops a real harsh acidity, and that can actually cause more acid reflux and more agitation in the stomach and the stomach lining. And so there's a lot of coffee out there that certain individuals can't consume because it's so acidic, and it causes more problems for that individual. It drives up acid reflux, causes pain and burning in their stomach, can cause more digestive issues. When the coffee is grown in the shade, it has more basic pH. It's around 6.0, basic is 7.0, compared to typical coffee, which is roughly 4.5 to 4.9 pH when it's cooked up. So the shade grown is going to be much easier for your digestive system to tolerate. So again, I love this company, Life Boost Coffee, and we'll have a link in our show notes where you can check it out. But it's organic, it's mycotoxin free, and shade grown. Now, there are other companies, not just Life Boost, that do this. So make sure your coffee that you have at home, try to get organic, mycotoxin free, shade grown for the best coffee experience to get the best benefits. Number 5, this is really beneficial as well, is you can add MCT oil to your coffee. The MCT oil turns into ketones. particularly if you get a C8 only caprylic acid MCT oil. We have one called Keto Brain that I recommend. It turns quickly into ketones, which cross the blood-brain barrier and turn down inflammation in the brain, and also turn down hunger and cravings. So for some individuals, adding in the MCT oil, they just feel really good. Like it gives them an even greater brain benefit than consuming the coffee alone. So that's a great way to get even more benefits to consuming the coffee. And for some individuals that may have not had a good experience with coffee, that may actually help them have a better experience with coffee. So to summarize this, for most people, coffee can have incredible health benefits. For some individuals, they really respond poorly to it. Now, taking that 1/3 of the population that doesn't respond well to it, there are things they can do that may improve their coffee experience and may allow them to consume some coffee, right? The right type and the right dose at the right time, and get health benefits without feeling, worse or increasing, their overall risk of developing degenerative disease later in life. So hopefully this was really helpful for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the content and now you know a lot more about coffee and you know the truth about coffee. Please share this with anybody that you know and that you care about, and we'll see you in a future video training.